You know, the world is a pretty big place. We're going to be flying on a plane for altogether about 10 hours between our trip to Iceland and then our trip over to Sweden, going via Copenhagen, Denmark. But just imagine how long you would have to be in a plane to fly all around this enormous place that we call the world. You would have to be on a plane for 2 days straight, 2 full days, 48 hours of flying to cover the entire world. And think about the country that you're going to, Sweden, and how many other countries that you've been to. How many countries do you think you will have traveled to by the time you expire, by the time you pass away? We have a short dance on this earth, 60, 70, 80 years, even longer if you're lucky. And how many countries will you have been to? Probably only a handful, because there's almost 200 countries in the world. That's amazing. Almost 200 countries. And so how many will you get to visit? And you're taking that big step of going to one of them and more, Denmark and Iceland as well. And a couple of you, I believe, are going to Paris, France on this trip. So even that and the experiences that you get from those, as enriching as they are, will only be a small smattering of the countries there are in this world. Now, when it comes to languages, if you grow up in the United States, we have what is considered to be an ethnocentric country. We'll learn that term a little bit later in more depth, but it has to do with focusing a lot of our talk and our content on ourselves. If you grow up in the U.S., you would be forgiven if you think that the most spoken language on the earth is English. It is not. It's actually Chinese. More people speak Chinese than any other language, and specifically Mandarin Chinese. But we aren't led to believe that because most of the people speaking Chinese are Chinese people, and they're concentrated in a particular portion of the world where that language is not being spread around. So what's the second language? It's still not English. It's Spanish. It's Spanish primarily because of Spain's colonization of Latin America and spreading, and the Caribbean, and spreading the Spanish language throughout those nations. So English is the third most spoken language on this planet. But it happens to be the most popular language in terms of places that it is spoken because, again, from colonization by the British. Colonization of the U.S., colonization of Canada, colonization of Caribbean islands, colonization of some Asian places like can't think of that country, but I'll have to mention that to you when we get into the class. But suffice it to say, Australia, for example, is considered in Eurasia. So the English language is spread, but also English has become the primary language of media. Media content, for the most part, is English, and the U.S. is a big exporter of media content like film, carrying the English language. So I think it's pretty amazing to think about that English is only the third most spoken language. And when it comes to the U.S., by the way, the U.S. is the third biggest country in the world. Again, it would be easy to think maybe it's the biggest, but actually Russia, formerly part of the Soviet Union, is the biggest country in the world. And just to give you a sense of how big it is, in the U.S. we have 4 time zones. We're in the Eastern Standard Time Zone, but in Russia they have 11 time zones. And then after that comes Canada. Canada is the second biggest country, and the U.S. is third. So we're going to be learning about these countries that we're going to and others through the media that we're going to be studying in this class. And we're going to be studying media in terms of asynchronous media and synchronous media. Asynchronous media are media that you connect with people in outside of real time. It's almost like sending an old-fashioned letter through the mail. You've written the letter, but the person receiving the letter doesn't read the letter when you're writing it. They read it when they get it in the mail. And that's what email is like. That's what texting is like. It's asynchronous. And we're also going to be studying those synchronous communication, which is everybody watching a TV show at the same time and talking about it. That's occurring in real time. Now, when we study media from around the world, we know that it's what we call a rhetorical experience. So that's the next concept that I want to introduce into this instructor video, that this class will have a rhetorical perspective. What does that mean? It means that there's no one meaning to anything that we're studying. Everybody's perspective is valid. And so we're looking at how media content invites people to gain meaning. When you watch a Swedish TV show and it has a lot of nature in it, because Sweden is very big on nature, what does it invite you to believe about Sweden? It invites you to believe that Sweden is a country that's very concerned with nature. And in fact, the place that I'm staying, my friend Peter's, they don't even use fluoride in their water. The water comes right up out of the ground. They don't have to treat it because it is so clean. And the capital of Sweden, Stockholm, a place that I've been to, you can go down to the waterways there. There are waterways running throughout Stockholm with a cup, and you can dip it in the water and you can drink it. It's not something you can do in New York City, right? So Sweden is a country, through its media content, if you see a lot of shows taking place in nature, it invites you to believe that nature is very important. And that's what a rhetorical perspective is all about. It's about trying to gain meaning from the comparisons that we're doing in this class between media systems, but nobody's comparison is right over anybody else's. And so we're always trying to discuss how could this meaning be validated by what we're being invited by the media content. Now, I use that word comparing. This is one of the chief ways that we learn in life. It's by comparing ourselves to other people. It's how you learn whether you're short or tall. You learn that by seeing what somebody next to you looks like. And that's what we do when we do in this class. We compare media systems, not for the purpose of saying that Ghana's media system is inferior to Lebanon's. No, we don't use those kinds of terminologies because it's rhetorical perspective, right? But we do it to say that Ghana's media system is more restrictive in this area or less restrictive compared to other countries. We're not placing a value on that. And part of what we're trying to do when we compare things to gain knowledge is we're trying to overcome a term that I coined called cultural myopia. Cultural myopia. Myopia is actually a term that related to eyesight. It refers to short-sightedness. And so one of the examples that I use of short-sightedness is people, when they talk about beer in England, they say, oh, the English drink beer warm. Well, no, the English don't drink beer warm. The English make a kind of beer called an ale. We have ales here in the United States. And the ale is supposed to be served at 58 degrees. That's the temperature at which the natural hops and barley get released into the air, and you have the proper aroma for that drink at 58 degrees. But in the United States, we tend to drink more lager. So if you drink Bud Light, for example, or even if you drink an imported beer, it might be Heineken. The lagers are served colder because it's a different kind of beer. And to release those temperatures, they are meant to be served at 48 degrees, 49 degrees, 50 degrees. And so if you refer to English beer as warm, it's an example of cultural myopia. It's short-sightedness. It's not really knowing about England, knowing about beer. Instead, the term to use to describe it would be the English drink their beer warmer. Warmer is it's a slightly different word, but it has a very big different meaning. And that's when you're overcoming cultural myopia. It's recognizing that what you're seeing is there's more depth to it that you need to understand by studying that other country. Now, I know that it's kind of an off-the-wall metaphor to use beer to discuss in this circumstance, but for example, when we talk about a Swedish documentary being very slow, for example, by studying Sweden, by studying the pace of life, by studying the lack of advertising in Swedish media, which compresses shows and makes shows speed up other parts so they can get the advertising in, then we're starting to get an understanding that a documentary in Sweden is not slow, but it might be slower. So we're overcoming cultural myopia. We do that through the comparative process, and that's one of my main goals in this class, for you to have a lifelong change in your mindset by overcoming cultural myopia by looking at media in Sweden, as well as these other countries that we're studying in this book, as well as any countries that you want to study on your own, because the structure of the book will allow you to do that. Italy or another country, Colombia, whatever that country is, you can study it using the structure of this book. So what is the structure of this book? To finish up this second instructor video, the next chapter is going to be moving on to globalization. It's going to be setting up for us a kind of worldwide trend that's happening, that's propelling changes in media. So we'll be taking on globalization in that chapter tomorrow. And then after that, we get into elements of a media system. And so now we're going to study the structure of the rest of the book. We're going to break down how we're going to be looking at the rest of the subject matter by looking at elements of media systems. So the first element that we'll get to study will actually be on Thursday, and that will be cultural characteristics of a country. We're going to look at the cultural characteristics as a foundation that leads to media content. We're going to be doing that on Thursday. And then from then on out, for the rest of the book, it goes into each different separate element. We'll look at philosophies on Monday, philosophies of a media system. When we're in Sweden, that'll be our first subject matter that we study, and so on. Okay, so there is the structure of the class, the structure of the book, and I'm just going to end by reminding you how truly big this world is and how difficult it is to see the world during our short dance on this earth. But we're making a great first start by going to Sweden on Friday. Have a great day.